The emergency klaxon pierced through Fort Campbell's morning air like a blade. Scramble alert. Real mission. Lives on the line. While seasoned pilots sprinted toward their Apache helicopters, one figure moved with impossible speed and precision. Her hands flew across pre-flight sequences that typically took seasoned veterans 20 minutes. Systems came online in perfect order. Engines spooled up with mechanical symphony. 12 seconds. That's all it took. The same woman they'd called Benchwarmer Betty for 18 months had just shattered every launch record on the base. But this story isn't about that moment of triumph. It's about the invisible preparation, the quiet determination, and the relentless pursuit of excellence that led to those 12 seconds that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Alabama sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Campbell's tarmac as Denise Laurel adjusted her flight helmet for the third time that morning. At 26, she possessed the kind of quiet intensity that people either dismissed or found unsettling. Her colleagues had chosen dismissal. "Betty's here early again," called out Chief Warrant Officer Jake Morrison, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension reserved for those he considered beneath notice. The nickname had stuck from her first week at the base, Benchwarmer Betty, a reference to her perpetual assignment to backup duty rather than primary flight status. Denise ignored the comment, focusing instead on the Apache AH-64E Guardian that dominated the hangar bay. The helicopter was a masterpiece of military engineering, standing nearly 15 feet tall with rotors that spanned over 48 feet. Its twin General Electric T700 turboshaft engines were capable of producing over 2,000 horsepower each, propelling the aircraft to speeds exceeding 180 miles per hour. But what fascinated Denise wasn't just the raw power. It was the intricate ballet of systems that had to work in perfect harmony to get this machine airborne. "Morning, Denise," said Captain Sarah Chen, one of the few pilots who used her actual name. Sarah had arrived from her previous assignment with commendations for excellence in combat operations, but she'd quickly learned that recognition at Fort Campbell operated on different principles. "Another backup assignment?" Denise nodded, checking her tablet for the day's flight roster. Primary pilot assignments went to Morrison, Lieutenant Colonel Brad Stevens, and Captain Mike Rodriguez, the same rotation that had dominated flight schedules since she'd arrived. Her name appeared consistently in the backup column, a perpetual understudy in a production where the leads never seemed to get sick. 18 months of backup duty, she murmured, more to herself than to Sarah. "You'd think someone might get curious about whether I can actually fly one of these things." The hangar buzzed with pre-flight activity as maintenance crews performed their systematic checks. Denise watched them work, noting every procedure, timing every sequence. She'd memorized the maintenance manual cover to cover, not because it was required for backup pilots, but because understanding every component of the Apache's systems felt essential to truly mastering the aircraft. Morrison's voice boomed across the hangar as he briefed his crew for the morning's training exercise. Standard reconnaissance patrol, grid sectors 7 through 12. Flight time approximately 2 hours. Weather conditions are optimal, visibility unlimited. His confidence was absolute, the kind that came from over a decade of flight experience, and the assumption that his position was unassailable. What Morrison didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Denise had been conducting her own analysis of their flight operations. During her countless hours of backup duty, she'd observed patterns in their procedures, inefficiencies in their pre-flight sequences, and opportunities for improvement that seemed invisible to pilots who'd grown comfortable with established routines. The Apache's startup sequence, as outlined in the technical manual, consisted of 43 distinct steps that needed to be completed in precise order. Engine start procedures alone involved 17 separate checks, each critical to safe operation. Most pilots at Fort Campbell completed these sequences in 18 to 22 minutes, depending on their experience level and the specific aircraft's condition. Denise had different ideas about timing. She'd spent her off-duty hours studying not just the standard procedures, but the relationships between systems that allowed for parallel processing of startup sequences. While other pilots performed checks sequentially, she'd identified opportunities for simultaneous operations that could dramatically reduce preparation time without compromising safety protocols. "Laurel," barked Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, the senior maintenance chief, Your bird's ready for inspection. Try not to find any imaginary problems this time. The comment stung because it referenced Denise's reputation for thorough pre-flight inspections that occasionally identified issues other pilots had missed. 3 weeks earlier, she'd discovered a hydraulic fluid leak that could have resulted in flight control problems. Instead of receiving credit for preventing a potential emergency, she'd been labeled as overly cautious and nitpicky. Denise approached her assigned Apache, tail number 0405389, with the systematic thoroughness that had earned her that reputation. She began with the external inspection, checking rotor blade condition, landing gear integrity, and weapon system mountings. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was processing information at multiple levels simultaneously. The aircraft's logbook showed standard maintenance intervals, but Denise had been tracking performance patterns that suggested optimization opportunities. Engine spool-up times varied slightly between aircraft, and she'd noticed that 0405389 consistently achieved target RPM approximately 1.3 seconds faster than fleet average. Small details, but details that could matter in emergency situations. "You know, Betty," said Rodriguez, approaching with his typical swagger, "all that extra checking isn't going to get you bumped up to primary status. Command assigns pilots based on experience and capability, not on how many imaginary problems you can find." Denise looked up from her clipboard, meeting his gaze directly. "Experience and capability," she repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting criteria. I'm curious. What's your best startup time, Captain?" Rodriguez laughed, the sound echoing off the hangar walls. "Startup time? What is this, a video game?" Real combat flying isn't about racing through checklists. It's about judgment, situational awareness, tactical thinking, things you learn through actual flight hours, not by memorizing manuals. 19 minutes and 40 seconds, Denise said quietly. The hangar went noticeably quieter. Rodriguez frowned. "What?" "Your average startup time. I've been tracking flight operations data for the past 6 months. Morrison averages 18 minutes 15 seconds. Stevens runs about 21 minutes, and you consistently hit 1940. Weather conditions and aircraft condition can add or subtract about 90 seconds from those averages." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Around them, maintenance crews had paused their work, sensing the tension in the conversation. Sarah Chen watched from across the hangar, her expression unreadable. Morrison stepped forward, his face flushed with irritation. "You've been timing us?" "What the hell kind of—" "Standard operational analysis," Denise interrupted, her voice remaining level. "The kind that identifies performance baselines and improvement opportunities. The kind that might matter if we ever face a real emergency situation where every second counts." "Listen, Betty," Morrison's voice carried a warning edge. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this isn't flight school anymore. This is operational military aviation, where experience trumps theory every single time. You can memorize every manual ever written, but that doesn't make you a pilot." Denise closed her logbook and faced him directly. "You're absolutely right about experience, Chief, but experience without analysis is just repetition. And repetition without improvement is just wasted time." The confrontation might have escalated, but Colonel Patricia Hayes chose that moment to enter the hangar. As the commanding officer of the 4th Aviation Regiment, Hayes commanded immediate attention from everyone present. Her reputation for no-nonsense leadership and intolerance for interpersonal drama preceded her wherever she went. "Good morning, people," Hayes announced, her voice carrying easily across the hangar. "I trust everyone's focused on today's training objectives rather than whatever discussion was happening here." Morrison straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am. Just reviewing flight assignments with the backup crew." Hayes glanced at Denise, then at the group of primary pilots. "Backup crew, right." Her tone suggested she was well aware of the base's unofficial hierarchy and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. "Carry on." "I want all training flights completed by 1,400 hours. Weather's moving in from the west." As Hayes departed, the hangar gradually returned to its normal pre-flight rhythm. But the tension from the earlier conversation lingered like humidity in the Alabama air. Denise completed her inspection procedures with the same methodical precision she always employed, but her mind was processing more than just mechanical systems. 18 months of backup duty, 18 months of watching other pilots launch missions while she remained grounded. 18 months of being dismissed, underestimated, and relegated to the sidelines of her own career. But 18 months had also meant 18 months of observation, analysis, and preparation. While others saw her thoroughness as excessive caution, Denise saw it as investment in readiness. Every procedure she'd memorized, every system she'd studied, every efficiency she'd identified was preparation for an opportunity that would eventually come. Because in military aviation, opportunities always came. Usually when you least expected them, often when everything was on the line, and invariably when being ready mattered more than being popular. Denise Laurel had been getting ready for 18 months. She just needed the chance to show them what ready looked like. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weekly flight assignment meeting took place every Monday at 0800 hours in Conference Room B, a sterile space dominated by a large table and walls covered with duty rosters, training schedules, and motivational posters about aviation excellence. Denise sat in her usual spot near the back, notepad ready, while the primary pilots occupied the front chairs with the casual confidence of those whose positions were never questioned. Colonel Hayes entered precisely on time, followed by Major Patricia Wells, the Deputy Operations Officer, and Lieutenant Colonel David Kim, the Training Coordinator. The leadership trio represented the decision-making authority that determined who flew missions and who watched from the ground. "Gentlemen and ladies," Hayes began, consulting her tablet, "this week's assignments reflect our ongoing commitment to operational readiness and pilot development. We have 3 priority missions and 2 training exercises that will require our most experienced crews." Denise's pen remained poised above her notepad as Hayes began reading assignments. Morrison would lead the high-priority reconnaissance mission over the Tennessee Valley. Stevens drew the VIP transport assignment for visiting Pentagon officials. Rodriguez received the Advanced Tactical Maneuvers training slot with the new Apache longbow systems. "Backup assignments," Hayes continued, and Denise felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. "Laurel, you'll provide ground support and equipment monitoring for all scheduled flights. Collins will handle secondary backup for mechanical contingencies." Warrant Officer Jessica Collins shot Denise a sympathetic look from across the table. As the only other female pilot in the unit, Collins understood the particular challenges of being taken seriously in a male-dominated environment, though her path to primary flight status had been notably smoother than Denise's journey. Major Wells leaned forward, addressing the room with the brisk efficiency that defined her leadership style. "I want to remind everyone that next month's evaluation exercises will determine our unit's readiness rating. Command is particularly focused on response times and operational efficiency. Any pilot failing to meet established benchmarks will face immediate review." The mention of benchmarks caught Denise's attention. She'd been tracking performance metrics for months, and the data painted an interesting picture that apparently no one else had noticed. While the primary pilots consistently met minimum standards, their performance showed troubling patterns of complacency and declining efficiency. Morrison's average response time from alert to airborne had increased by 12% over the past 6 months. Stevens exhibited growing inconsistency in his pre-flight procedures, sometimes skipping secondary system checks that could prove critical in emergency situations. Rodriguez's tactical performance remained solid, but his equipment familiarization scores suggested he wasn't keeping pace with technology updates. None of these issues were officially documented because none of them fell below minimum acceptable standards. But in Denise's analysis, minimum acceptable wasn't the same as optimal performance. The gap between what was required and what was possible represented missed opportunities that could prove costly in real-world scenarios. After the meeting dispersed, Denise approached Lieutenant Colonel Kim with what she hoped would be received as constructive feedback rather than criticism. "Sir, I've been reviewing our unit's performance trends and identified some areas where we might improve overall efficiency." Kim looked up from his scheduling tablet with the polite but distant expression he reserved for junior personnel raising issues outside their assigned responsibilities. "Performance trends, Laurel? That's typically the domain of operations analysis, not backup pilots." "Yes, sir, but as backup crew, I have unique visibility into multiple flight operations. I've noticed patterns that might be worth addressing before the evaluation exercises." The conversation was interrupted by Morrison, who'd been lingering near the conference room door with obvious intention to eavesdrop. Colonel Kim, sir, I hope you're not entertaining more of Betty's theories about how we should run flight operations. She's been timing our procedures like we're competing in some kind of race. Kim's expression shifted from polite interest to mild irritation. Timing procedures? Laurel, is this related to your analytical project that I've been hearing about? The question contained multiple layers of meaning, none of them favorable to Denise's position. Her documentation of operational patterns had apparently become the subject of discussion among the primary pilots, and that discussion had clearly reached the command level in a negative context. Sir, I believe systematic analysis can identify improvement opportunities that benefit the entire unit. For example, I've identified modifications to standard pre-flight sequences that could reduce preparation time by 15 to 20% without compromising safety protocols. Stevens joined the conversation with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to contribute. Colonel, with respect to Laurel's enthusiasm, theoretical improvements don't necessarily translate to practical aviation. Combat flying requires instincts and experience that can't be learned from manuals or spreadsheets. The three primary pilots now formed an informal coalition facing Denise across the narrow hallway outside the conference room. The dynamics were unmistakable: established hierarchy, defending itself against perceived challenge from an outsider who didn't understand her place in the system. Major Wells emerged from the conference room and immediately sensed the tension in the group. Is there a problem here? Kim gestured toward Denise with barely concealed exasperation. Laurel has been conducting unauthorized analysis of our flight operations and wants to propose modifications to established procedures. The word unauthorized landed like a physical blow. Denise felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized how her months of careful observation and analysis were being characterized by the command structure. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Wells directly, "I was simply identifying potential efficiency improvements based on operational data. Nothing unauthorized, just analysis of publicly available performance metrics." Wells considered this for a moment, her expression unreadable. As Deputy Operations Officer, she was responsible for operational efficiency, but she was also responsible for maintaining unit cohesion and respecting established command relationships. "Laurel," she said finally, "I appreciate your initiative, but operational analysis is the responsibility of designated personnel with appropriate training and authorization. Your job as backup pilot is to maintain readiness and support assigned missions, not to evaluate the performance of senior pilots." The dismissal was gentle but absolute. Around her, Denise could feel the satisfaction radiating from Morrison, Stevens, and Rodriguez. The system had defended itself successfully, relegating her back to her assigned role as permanent understudy. However, Wells continued, and the single word caused a subtle shift in the group's energy, "I want to see your analysis, not for implementation, but for my own information." Operational efficiency is always a concern, and different perspectives can sometimes offer valuable insights. Morrison's satisfaction evaporated immediately. "Ma'am, I'm not sure it's appropriate to encourage." "Chief Morrison," Wells interrupted with a tone that brooked no argument, "I wasn't asking for your opinion on what's appropriate. I was giving direction to Specialist Laurel." The hierarchy reasserted itself swiftly. Morrison straightened and nodded acknowledgement, but his expression promised future complications for Denise's already precarious position within the unit. After the group dispersed, Denise remained in the hallway, processing what had just occurred. Major Wells' request for her analysis represented a small victory, but it came at the cost of further alienating the primary pilots who controlled her daily work environment. That afternoon, she compiled her findings into a professional presentation that documented performance trends, identified efficiency opportunities, and proposed modifications to standard operating procedures. The work represented months of careful observation and analysis, presented with the kind of technical precision that had become her hallmark. The data was undeniable. Current procedures, while adequate for normal operations, contained inefficiencies that could prove problematic under emergency conditions. Her proposed modifications could improve response times, reduce fuel consumption, and enhance overall operational effectiveness without compromising safety standards. But as she prepared to submit the analysis to Major Wells, Denise understood that the technical merits of her work were secondary to the political implications of a backup pilot questioning established practices. Her position in the unit's informal hierarchy made any suggestion for improvement sound like criticism of senior personnel. The next morning brought confirmation of her concerns. She arrived at the hangar to find her locker had been moved to a less convenient location. Her access to certain technical manuals had been, quote, temporarily restricted for inventory purposes, and her backup duty assignments had been modified to include additional administrative responsibilities that would limit her time around active flight operations. The message was clear: stay in your lane, accept your role, and stop asking questions that made people uncomfortable. Denise organized her relocated locker with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else, but her mind was already adapting to new constraints. If official channels were closed to her, she would find unofficial alternatives. If her access to information was restricted, she would work with what she could observe and remember. The system of exclusion was comprehensive, but it wasn't perfect. Every system had vulnerabilities, and Denise Laurel had become expert at finding them. She just needed to be more careful about how she exploited them. The maintenance hangar fell silent after 2,200 hours, transformed from the bustling hub of daytime operations into a cathedral of sleeping machines. Apache helicopters sat in perfect rows, their rotors folded, their systems powered down, waiting for tomorrow's missions. For most personnel, this was the end of the duty day. For Denise Laurel, it was the beginning of her real education. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson, the night shift maintenance supervisor, had noticed her pattern weeks ago. Every evening, long after other pilots had departed for the officers' club or their quarters, Denise remained in the hangar area, ostensibly completing administrative tasks, but clearly studying the aircraft with intense focus. "You know, Laurel," Thompson said one evening as he conducted his final security walkthrough, "most pilots don't spend their off-duty time memorizing hydraulic system schematics." Denise looked up from the technical manual spread across her makeshift desk near Apache 0405-389. "Most pilots don't get 18 months to study their aircraft without flying them," she replied with dry humor. Thompson, a 20-year veteran who'd maintained helicopters through 3 deployments, understood the frustration in her voice. He'd watched dozens of pilots come and go, and he developed reliable instincts about who possessed genuine talent versus those who simply occupied positions. "You want to know something interesting about these birds?" he asked, gesturing toward the nearest Apache. "Every one of them has personality, quirks, individual characteristics that aren't in any manual. The pilots who figure that out become great aviators, the ones who don't just follow checklists for 20 years. The comment sparked an idea that would transform Denise's approach to preparation. If each aircraft had individual characteristics, then truly mastering Apache operations meant understanding not just the standardized procedures, but the specific nuances of each machine in the fleet. That night, she began what would become her most ambitious project, creating detailed profiles of every Apache helicopter at Fort Campbell, not just their maintenance records and performance specifications, but their individual behavioral patterns, their unique response characteristics, their particular strengths and limitations. Apache 0405-389, her most frequent backup assignment, had what she termed eager engines, turboshafts that spooled up 1.3 seconds faster than fleet average and maintained more consistent RPM under varying load conditions. The flight control system exhibited slightly more responsive collective input, requiring softer touch during hover operations. Apache 0207-241 presented different characteristics entirely. Its engines required an additional 4 seconds to reach optimal operating temperature, but once warmed, they delivered exceptionally smooth power delivery with minimal vibration. The navigation systems showed a persistent drift tendency that required manual correction every 12 minutes during extended flights. Week after week, Denise expanded her database of aircraft personalities. She studied maintenance logs, interviewed mechanics about recurring issues, and most importantly, she observed the machines during operations. From her ground support position, she had unique visibility into how different aircraft performed under identical conditions, revealing patterns that escaped pilots focused on mission execution rather than systematic analysis. Sergeant Thompson became an unexpected ally in this endeavor. His decades of maintenance experience provided insights that complemented Denise's theoretical knowledge with practical wisdom about mechanical behavior and system integration. "See that slight hesitation in the number 2 engine during startup?" Thompson pointed out one evening as they watched Rodriguez's crew prepare for a night training flight. "That bird's been doing that for 3 months. Maintenance keeps signing off because it meets technical specifications, but I guarantee it'll get worse before it gets better." Denise documented the observation in her growing collection of aircraft profiles. 3 weeks later, Apache 0207241 experienced an engine warning light during flight, forcing Rodriguez to abort his mission and return to base immediately. The investigation revealed exactly the progressive deterioration Thompson had predicted. But individual aircraft characteristics represented only one dimension of Denise's secret preparation. Her real breakthrough came when she gained access to the base's flight simulator during off-peak hours. The simulator facility, officially designated as the Aviation Training Support Center, operated on a schedule that prioritized primary pilots during normal duty hours. However, the equipment required regular maintenance and calibration procedures that often extended into evening hours. Chief Warrant Officer Janet Foster, the simulator's technical supervisor, appreciated having additional personnel available to assist with system checks and diagnostic procedures. "I could use someone with your attention to detail to help verify calibration sequences," Foster mentioned during one of their chance encounters in the base computer center. "The work's tedious, but it ensures simulator accuracy for training operations." The opportunity was exactly what Denise needed. Under the guise of technical assistance, she gained legitimate access to the simulator during hours when primary pilots weren't present. The calibration procedures required running complete startup sequences, system checks, and operational protocols, essentially providing her with unlimited practice time on equipment identical to actual Apache helicopters. Foster proved to be another unexpected mentor. Her background included 15 years as an Apache pilot before transitioning to training systems development, and she possessed deep understanding of both operational requirements and technical capabilities. The simulators program with over 40 different scenarios, Foster explained during one of their evening calibration sessions. Emergency procedures, weather conditions, equipment failures, tactical situations. Most pilots see maybe 6 or 8 scenarios during their official training rotations. Denise absorbed this information with the intensity of someone who understood that knowledge might be her only path to opportunity. While primary pilots practiced the same basic scenarios repeatedly, she began working through every available program, from routine operations to catastrophic emergency procedures that most aviators never encountered in their entire careers. Her approach to simulation training reflected the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. She didn't just complete scenarios. She analyzed them, identified optimal response patterns, and practiced variations until her reactions became instinctive rather than deliberate. Emergency auto-rotation procedures, typically practiced once or twice per year by operational pilots, became routine exercises she could execute flawlessly under any simulated condition. Complex weather scenarios that challenged experienced aviators became opportunities to refine her instrument flying skills and develop judgment about operational limitations. Most importantly, she began practicing the rapid startup sequences that had become her obsession. The simulator allowed her to experiment with procedure modifications without safety concerns, testing her theories about parallel processing and system optimization under controlled conditions. Her best official startup time, recorded during initial qualification training 18 months earlier, had been 21 minutes and 30 seconds. Respectable for a newly qualified pilot, but nothing exceptional. Through systematic practice and procedure refinement, she gradually reduced that time while maintaining absolute adherence to safety protocols. 20 minutes, 18 minutes, 15 minutes, and 40 seconds. Each improvement represented not just increased speed, but deeper understanding of system relationships and operational principles. She learned which checks could be performed simultaneously, which systems could be activated in parallel, and which procedures could be streamlined without compromising safety or regulatory compliance. Thompson and Foster became her informal advisors, offering insights gleaned from decades of operational experience. They understood that her dedication wasn't about showing off or breaking records. It was about achieving the kind of operational excellence that could prove decisive in emergency situations. "You know," Foster observed one evening as Denise completed another flawless emergency scenario, "I've trained hundreds of pilots over the years. Most of them are competent professionals who follow procedures and complete missions successfully. But every now and then, you encounter someone who approaches aviation as an art form rather than just a job." The comment resonated deeply with Denise because it captured something she'd never been able to articulate about her relationship with flying. For her, Mastering the Apache wasn't about career advancement or professional recognition. It was about achieving a level of capability that transcended mere competence. Night after night, she continued her secret preparation. Aircraft profiles expanded into comprehensive databases. Simulator sessions evolved from basic skill practice to advanced scenario mastery. Her understanding of Apache systems deepened from textbook knowledge to intuitive comprehension. By day, she remained Benchwarmer Betty, relegated to backup status and excluded from meaningful flight operations. But by night, in the quiet hours when the base slept and the hangars echoed with her footsteps, she was becoming something else entirely. She was becoming ready for whatever opportunity might eventually present itself. And in military aviation, opportunity always came to those prepared to seize it. The emergency alert pierced through Fort Campbell's early morning silence at 0547 hours on a Tuesday that would forever change the base's operational dynamics. Denise jolted awake in her quarters, instantly recognizing the specific tone pattern that indicated a real-world crisis rather than a training exercise. Around her, the base erupted into coordinated chaos as personnel responded to their first genuine emergency in over 2 years. The situation briefing in the operations center revealed the scope of the crisis. A civilian medical helicopter had crashed in the remote Tennessee mountains during a patient transport mission. 4 souls on board, including a critically injured child being transported to Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with a severe storm system moving through the region that would ground all civilian rescue aircraft within hours. Colonel Hayes stood before the assembled flight crews, her expression grave as she outlined the mission parameters. We have a narrow window of opportunity before weather conditions become unsurmountable. The crash site is located in terrain that's challenging under optimal conditions and nearly impossible in the current weather pattern. The digital display showed topographical maps of the search area, steep ridges, dense forest coverage, and limited landing zones that would test even the most experienced pilots. Weather data indicated wind gusts approaching the maximum operational limits for Apache helicopters, with visibility dropping rapidly as the storm system intensified. I need our most experienced crews for this mission, Hayes continued, her gaze sweeping across the primary pilots. Morrison, you'll lead the primary search team. Stevens, you'll handle coordination with civilian emergency services. Rodriguez, you're backup for medical evacuation if we locate survivors. Denise felt the familiar disappointment as she was once again relegated to ground support duties, monitoring communications, and maintaining equipment readiness. But this time the exclusion felt different. This wasn't a training exercise or routine patrol. This was a mission where her capabilities might actually save lives. The first indication of problems came 30 minutes into mission preparation. Morrison's aircraft, Apache 0207241, began displaying intermittent engine warnings during pre-flight procedures. The same progressive deterioration that Sergeant Thompson had predicted months earlier had finally reached critical levels, forcing the aircraft out of service at the worst possible moment. "Sir," Morrison called across the hangar, frustration evident in his voice, "I need an alternate aircraft." This bird's showing engine parameters outside acceptable limits. Hayes consulted her tablet reviewing aircraft availability. "Stevens, you take 0405389. Morrison, you get Stevens' original assignment, 0306154. Rodriguez remains on 0108276. The aircraft shuffle created a cascading series of problems that became apparent only as crews attempted to complete their pre-flight procedures. Stevens, accustomed to his regular aircraft's specific characteristics, struggled with the different handling qualities of 0405389. Morrison found himself dealing with navigation system quirks in 0306154 that he'd never encountered before. Most critically, Rodriguez discovered that 0108276 had been equipped with an older software configuration that lacked some of the medical evacuation modifications needed for potential casualty transport. The technical complications were mounting faster than solutions could be implemented. From her position at the communication station, Denise watched the unfolding crisis with growing concern. Every minute of delay reduced the chances of successful rescue, and the weather window was closing rapidly. The sophisticated emergency response plan was crumbling under the weight of equipment problems and crew unfamiliarity with alternate aircraft. Major Wells approached Hayes with obvious urgency. "Ma'am, we're looking at significant delays. The crews need time to familiarize themselves with different aircraft configurations, and Rodriguez's bird needs software updates before it can handle medical transport protocols." Hayes checked her watch with visible frustration. "How long for the updates?" "Minimum 45 minutes, assuming no complications." The delay was unacceptable. Weather projections showed the storm system intensifying faster than predicted, with flight conditions becoming marginal within the hour. By the time Rodriguez's aircraft was properly configured, the rescue window might have closed entirely. "Ma'am," Denise found herself speaking before conscious thought could stop her, "I'm familiar with all the aircraft configurations in question. I could brief the crews on specific handling characteristics to reduce familiarization time." Hayes turned toward her with surprise. "Laurel, how are you familiar with multiple aircraft configurations?" The question put Denise in a difficult position. Explaining her months of secret aircraft analysis would reveal activities that hadn't been officially authorized, potentially creating additional complications during an already critical situation. "I've been conducting detailed maintenance support analysis," she said carefully. "Part of my backup duties has involved tracking performance variations across the fleet." Morrison interrupted with barely concealed irritation. "Colonel, we don't have time for theoretical briefings from backup personnel. These are complex aircraft with specific operational requirements that take months to master." "Chief Morrison," Hayes replied sharply, "right now I'm interested in solutions, not explanations about why solutions won't work. Laurel, you have 5 minutes to brief the crews on critical configuration differences." What followed was perhaps the most important presentation of Denise's career. Standing before the 3 primary pilots, she outlined the specific characteristics of each aircraft with the precision that came from months of systematic analysis. Apache 0405-389 has responsive collective input requiring lighter touch during hover operations. Navigation system is standard configuration, but GPS accuracy is consistently 3 meters better than fleet average. Engine spool-up is 1.3 seconds faster than normal, so adjust your startup timing accordingly. Stevens nodded grudgingly. The information was more detailed and practical than anything in the standard aircraft documentation. Apache 030-6154 requires manual trim adjustment every 8 minutes during forward flight. The autopilot has a persistent altitude drift that's within acceptable parameters but needs constant monitoring. Fuel consumption runs about 4% higher than standard due to engine tuning variations. Morrison's expression shifted from skepticism to attention as he realized the briefing contained genuinely useful operational information. Apache 01-08276 is running older software, but the medical evacuation hardware is fully functional. The configuration differences are in the interface protocols, not the actual capability. I can walk Rodriguez through the alternate procedures. The briefing concluded with detailed explanations of workarounds for the software limitations, alternate procedures for medical transport, and specific recommendations for handling each aircraft's unique characteristics during the challenging weather conditions they would encounter. Hayes checked her watch again. "Outstanding, Laurel. That should save us significant time." She turned to address the flight crews. "Gentlemen, I want you airborne in 15 minutes. Weather conditions are deteriorating faster than predicted." But as the crews began their accelerated pre-flight procedures, a new crisis emerged. Rodriguez, attempting to implement the alternate medical evacuation procedures Denise had outlined, encountered software conflicts that threatened to delay his departure indefinitely. "Ma'am," he called across the hangar, "the alternate protocols are causing system integration problems. I need additional time to resolve the conflicts." Hayes closed her eyes for a moment, clearly calculating the implications. Every delay reduced rescue chances while increasing weather-related risks for the aircrews. The mission was balanced on a knife's edge between success and failure. "Colonel," Denise said quietly, approaching Hayes with careful determination, "I could resolve those software conflicts. I'm familiar with the integration protocols and the specific workarounds needed for that aircraft configuration." The suggestion hung in the air like an electric charge. Around the hangar, conversation stopped as personnel realized what Denise was implying. She wasn't just offering technical support. She was positioning herself as potentially essential to mission success. Hayes studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing options against a rapidly closing window of opportunity. The decision she made next would determine not just the outcome of the rescue mission, but the future trajectory of everyone involved. The storm was coming, Lives hung in the balance, and conventional solutions were proving inadequate. It was exactly the kind of moment Denise had been preparing for her entire career. Colonel Hayes stood at the center of a rapidly deteriorating situation, watching her most experienced pilot struggle with technical problems that threatened to derail the entire rescue mission. The weather window was shrinking by the minute, and conventional solutions were proving inadequate against the mounting cascade of equipment and software complications. "Ma'am," Major Wells approached with the latest weather update, her expression grim. "Meteorology is revising their projections. We now have maybe 30 minutes of flyable conditions before the storm system makes operations impossible. After that, we're looking at a 12-hour delay minimum." 12 hours was a death sentence for anyone injured in the crash. Hayes understood the mathematics of trauma survival as clearly as she understood the physics of helicopter flight. Every minute of delay exponentially reduced the chances of successful rescue. Rodriguez's frustrated voice carried across the hangar as he continued wrestling with the software integration problems. "These protocols aren't designed to work together. I need a systems specialist to resolve the conflicts, or we're looking at significant additional delays." The base's primary systems specialist was attending a training conference at Fort Rucker, leaving them without official technical support for the complex integration issues. Hayes felt the weight of command as she watched a critical mission unraveling due to technical complications that should have been manageable. "Colonel," Denise approached with quiet confidence, "I can resolve those integration problems. I've studied the medical evacuation protocols extensively and identified the specific compatibility issues Rodriguez is encountering." Hayes turned toward her with the expression of someone whose options were rapidly disappearing. "Laurel, systems integration is highly specialized work. One mistake could disable the aircraft entirely." "Yes, ma'am. But with respect, the alternative is mission failure while people die waiting for rescue." The brutal honesty of the statement cut through the hangar's tension like a blade. Around them, maintenance crews and flight personnel had paused their activities, sensing the pivotal nature of the conversation unfolding between the commanding officer and the pilot everyone called Benchwarmer Betty. Hayes made a decision that would reverberate through every subsequent event. "Show me what you can do." What happened next would be discussed in Fort Campbell's operational briefings for years to come. Denise approached Rodriguez's aircraft with the calm assurance of someone who had visualized this exact scenario countless times during her secret preparation sessions. She settled into the pilot's seat and began navigating through the aircraft's complex menu systems with fluid precision. Her hands moved across the controls with the kind of familiarity that typically required hundreds of hours of operational experience. Every input was deliberate, every selection optimal for the specific integration challenges the aircraft presented. "The problem is in the protocol handshaking between the medical monitoring systems and the flight management computer," she explained as she worked, her voice steady despite the weight of attention focused on her performance. "The software versions are compatible, but they're trying to establish connection through outdated communication pathways." Rodriguez leaned over her shoulder, watching with growing amazement as she navigated through system menus he'd never seen before. "How do you know about those pathways?" "That's advanced technical knowledge that's not covered in standard pilot training." Denise continued working while she answered. "I've been studying every technical manual available, analyzing system relationships, and practicing integration procedures during off-duty hours. When you're excluded from flight operations, you find other ways to learn about aircraft systems." The comment carried implications that weren't lost on anyone present. Months of systematic exclusion had resulted in technical knowledge that exceeded the capabilities of pilots with years of operational experience. While others had flown missions, she had been learning the deeper principles that made those missions possible. "There," she announced as the integration process completed successfully. "Medical evacuation protocols are now fully integrated with flight management systems. All monitoring equipment is operational, communication pathways are established, and the aircraft is ready for casualty transport." Rodriguez moved to the pilot's seat and began cycling through the newly configured systems. Every interface responded perfectly, every protocol executed flawlessly. The integration that had threatened to delay the mission indefinitely was now resolved with surgical precision. "Jesus," he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is better than the configuration on our primary medical evacuation aircraft. How long would it have taken you to learn this level of systems integration?" "I learned it over the past 18 months, Denise replied simply. While practicing on the simulator during calibration sessions and studying technical documentation during my assigned inventory duties, the revelation hit the hangar like a physical force. 18 months of secret preparation. 18 months of developing expertise that none of them had suspected. 18 months of being dismissed as Benchwarmer Betty, while quietly becoming more technically proficient than the pilots who had excluded her. Major Wells approached the aircraft, consulting her tablet with visible amazement. Laurel, these system configurations, they're beyond standard operational requirements. This represents advanced technical specialization that we don't even teach in our formal training programs. Staff Sergeant Thompson, who had been observing from across the hangar, allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. He'd suspected for months that Denise's dedication would eventually prove itself in exactly this kind of situation. Chief Warrant Officer Foster emerged from the simulator facility, drawn by the commotion in the hangar. When she saw Denise at the controls of Rodriguez's aircraft, surrounded by amazed flight crews and command personnel, her expression shifted to quiet pride mixed with inevitability. "Colonel Hayes," Foster said, approaching the group with official bearing, "I should mention that Specialist Laurel has been assisting with simulator calibration and maintenance for the past several months. Her technical knowledge and procedural precision have been exceptional throughout that period." The statement provided official context for capabilities that might otherwise have seemed to appear from nowhere. Hayes understood immediately that Foster was giving her cover to make decisions that would have been difficult to justify without documented evidence of Denise's technical competence. But the most dramatic revelation was yet to come. "Ma'am," Denise said, turning to face Hayes directly, "there's something else you should know. I've been tracking performance metrics for all our pilots, and I've identified significant efficiency improvements that could be critical for this mission." She pulled out a tablet containing months of carefully documented analysis. "Current average startup time for our crews is 19 minutes. Given the weather window constraints, those standard procedures may not provide sufficient margin for mission success." Hayes accepted the tablet and began reviewing the performance data with growing astonishment. The analysis was comprehensive, professional, and revealed patterns that had apparently escaped the attention of the official command structure. "According to this data," Hayes said slowly, "you've identified procedure modifications that could reduce startup time to 15 minutes. 14 minutes and 30 seconds, ma'am. I've tested the modifications extensively using the simulator during calibration sessions. The procedures maintain full safety compliance while optimizing system startup through parallel processing and streamlined verification protocols." Morrison stepped forward, his expression skeptical despite the evidence he just witnessed. "Colonel, simulator performance doesn't necessarily translate to actual aircraft operations. Real-world conditions include variables that can't be replicated in training systems." "You're absolutely right, Chief," Denise replied calmly. "That's why I've also been studying the specific characteristics of every aircraft in our fleet, documenting their individual performance patterns and operational quirks. The procedure modifications account for aircraft-specific variables as well as general optimization principles." She gestured toward Apache 0405-389, her most frequent backup assignment. "For example, that aircraft's engines spool up 1.3 seconds faster than fleet average, its flight control systems are more responsive than standard, and its navigation computer processes GPS updates more efficiently. The modified procedures take advantage of those characteristics to achieve optimal startup timing." The silence that followed was profound. Around the hangar, personnel absorbed the implications of what they were hearing. The pilot they dismissed and excluded had not only developed expert-level technical knowledge, but had created comprehensive performance analysis that surpassed anything in their official operational documentation. Hayes closed the tablet and looked directly at Denise with an expression that mixed amazement with calculation. The rescue mission hung in the balance. Weather conditions continued deteriorating, and conventional approaches had proven inadequate. It was time to discover whether 18 months of secret preparation could deliver the performance that might save lives. "Laurel," Hayes said with quiet authority, "I want to see those startup procedures demonstrated, right now." The hangar fell into expectant silence as Denise approached Apache 0405-389, the aircraft she knew better than any pilot on the base. Every eye was focused on her movements as she began the pre-flight inspection with the same methodical precision that had characterized her work for 18 months. But this time, the stakes extended far beyond proving a point. Lives hung in the balance, and failure meant condemning crash survivors to death. Colonel Hayes consulted her chronometer with visible tension. Weather window is now 26 minutes. After that, flight operations become impossible until the storm passes. The pressure was immense, but Denise felt an unexpected calm settle over her as she settled into the pilot's seat. This was the moment she had been preparing for through countless hours of secret training, simulation practice, and technical analysis. Every procedure she was about to execute had been rehearsed to the point of muscle memory. Beginning modified startup sequence, she announced through her headset, her voice steady despite the magnitude of attention focused on her performance. What followed was a display of aviation expertise that none of the observers would ever forget. Denise's hands moved across the control panels with fluid choreography, executing multiple procedures simultaneously rather than following the traditional sequential approach. While her left hand initiated engine startup protocols, her right activated navigation systems. Her feet worked the pedals to begin hydraulic pressure buildup, while her eyes scanned instrument displays with practiced efficiency. The first indication that something extraordinary was happening came when both engines achieved ignition in perfect synchronization, their turbine whine building to operational RPM with mechanical precision that spoke to optimal timing and flawless technique. "Engines spooled and stable at 4 minutes 15 seconds, called out Sergeant Thompson from his monitoring position. His voice carried amazement that was immediately apparent to everyone present. Standard engine startup typically required 6 to 7 minutes for most pilots. But Denise was just getting started. Her modified procedures had transformed the normally sequential startup process into a carefully orchestrated parallel operation. While engines continued their warm-up cycle, she simultaneously activated flight control systems, completed navigation initialization, and verified communication protocols. Flight controls responsive, navigation systems online, communications established, she reported at the 6-minute mark. Most pilots would still be waiting for engines to reach operating temperature. Rodriguez leaned toward Morrison with undisguised amazement. "She's running procedures I've never seen before. Everything's happening simultaneously, but it's all perfectly coordinated." Stevens nodded, his earlier skepticism evaporating as he watched Denise execute techniques that seemed to defy conventional wisdom about Apache operations. Those aren't standard procedures, but they're working flawlessly. How is she maintaining system integration while processing that many parallel operations? The answer lay in 18 months of secret preparation that had given Denise understanding of system relationships that exceeded anything taught in formal training programs. She knew exactly which procedures could be safely parallelized, which systems could be activated simultaneously, and how to optimize every aspect of the startup sequence without compromising safety or regulatory compliance. "All systems nominal pre-flight checks complete," Denise announced at the 9-minute mark. The hangar buzzed with quiet conversations as personnel absorbed the implications of what they were witnessing. Major Wells approached Colonel Hayes with barely contained excitement. "Ma'am, she's achieved in 9 minutes what typically takes our best pilots 15 to 16 minutes, and every system is showing optimal parameters." But the most critical test was yet to come. Actual flight operations would determine whether Denise's simulator-based training translated to real-world performance under emergency conditions. "Laurel," Hayes spoke through the communication system, "I want you to demonstrate tactical flight procedures. Show me rapid response capabilities that would be required for the rescue mission." The test parameters were demanding: immediate takeoff, rapid climb to operational altitude, precision navigation to specified coordinates, and emergency landing procedures that would be essential for the mountain rescue operation. Denise lifted the Apache from the hangar floor with a kind of smooth control that spoke to instinctive understanding of the aircraft's flight characteristics. The helicopter rose steadily, its movements precise and confident, despite the challenging weather conditions that were beginning to affect the airfield. "Airborne and climbing," she reported, her voice calm as she guided the Apache through increasingly turbulent air, proceeding to navigation waypoint Alpha. From the ground, observers watched through binoculars as the helicopter executed maneuvers that demonstrated not just competence, but genuine expertise. Denise's flight path was direct and efficient, her altitude changes smooth and calculated, her response to wind gusts immediate and appropriate. "She's flying like she's been doing this for years," Thompson observed to Foster. "That's not beginner's luck or simulator skills, that's real aviation expertise." Foster nodded, feeling a surge of pride for the pilot she'd quietly mentored during those evening calibration sessions. She absorbed everything we taught her, and then went far beyond it. I've never seen anyone develop flight skills that rapidly. The most dramatic demonstration came when Hayes ordered Denise to execute emergency procedures that would simulate the kind of challenging conditions expected during the mountain rescue operation. Simulated engine failure, immediate auto-rotation required, Hayes announced through the radio, testing Denise's ability to handle the kind of catastrophic emergency that separated competent pilots from true experts. Denise's response was immediate and flawless. She reduced collective pitch, adjusted cyclic control, and managed the auto-rotation with textbook precision, while simultaneously transmitting emergency procedures and maintaining situational awareness of her surroundings. The emergency landing was executed with surgical precision, touching down in the designated area with minimal impact and perfect aircraft control. The entire sequence, from simulated failure to successful emergency landing, demonstrated skill levels that exceeded the performance of pilots with years of operational experience. "Outstanding," Hayes transmitted as Denise completed the emergency procedures, returned to base for mission briefing. The flight back to Fort Campbell provided the final confirmation of Denise's capabilities. Despite increasingly challenging weather conditions, she maintained perfect flight control, optimal navigation, and smooth communication procedures throughout the return journey. As the Apache touched down in the hangar area, the assembled personnel broke into spontaneous applause. They had witnessed something unprecedented, the transformation of Benchwarmer Betty into a pilot whose capabilities exceeded those of the unit's most experienced aviators. Denise shut down the aircraft using the same modified procedures that had characterized her startup sequence, completing the entire process in record time while maintaining absolute adherence to safety protocols. Total flight time from startup to shutdown, 12 minutes and 18 seconds, announced Thompson, his voice carrying amazement that was immediately apparent to everyone present. Hayes approached the aircraft as Denise completed her post-flight procedures. "Specialist Laurel," she said with formal authority that barely concealed her amazement. "That was the most impressive demonstration of aviation expertise I've witnessed in 20 years of military service." The comment resonated through the hangar as personnel absorbed the implications. The commanding officer of the 4th Aviation Regiment, a pilot with decades of experience and countless combat operations, had just declared that Denise's performance exceeded anything she'd previously observed. "Ma'am," Denise replied as she removed her helmet, "I'm ready for the rescue mission." Hayes consulted her chronometer one final time. Weather window is now 18 minutes. Standard startup procedures would leave insufficient margin for mission success. She paused, clearly calculating options against rapidly deteriorating conditions. "Laurel, you're now designated as primary pilot for the rescue operation. Your modified procedures and demonstrated capabilities give us the best chance of successful mission completion within available weather constraints." The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled personnel. In less than 30 minutes, Benchwarmer Betty had been transformed from excluded backup to primary pilot for the most critical mission the base had faced in years. Morrison stepped forward, his expression reflecting the struggle between professional recognition and personal disbelief. "Colonel, with respect, Laurel's demonstration was impressive, but rescue operations involve variables that can't be simulated. Navigation in mountain terrain, medical evacuation procedures, communication with civilian emergency services. These require operational experience that—" "Chief Morrison," Hayes interrupted with unmistakable authority, "Specialist Laurel has just demonstrated capabilities that exceed standard operational requirements. More importantly, her technical knowledge and procedural innovations may be essential for mission success under current constraints." The decision was final. 18 months of systematic exclusion had culminated in recognition that transcended every assumption about capability, experience, and readiness. Denise Laurel was about to lead the most important mission of her career. The storm clouds had transformed the Tennessee mountains into a labyrinth of shifting shadows and treacherous air currents as Denise guided Apache 0405-389 through the narrow valleys toward the crash site. Her co-pilot, Captain Sarah Chen, monitored navigation systems while maintaining constant communication with civilian emergency coordinators who were tracking their progress from ground stations. "Phoenix Base, this is Rescue 1, Denise transmitted through the increasingly turbulent radio conditions. "We're approaching grid reference 77 Alpha. Weather conditions are marginal but manageable. Beginning search pattern now. The response crackled through heavy static. Rescue 1. Be advised that civilian aircraft attempted this search pattern 40 minutes ago and were forced to abort due to severe turbulence. Recommend extreme caution. Denise acknowledged the warning while simultaneously processing the flight dynamics that would be required to maintain stable flight in the deteriorating conditions. Her months of simulator training had included weather scenarios that civilian pilots rarely encountered, giving her experience with extreme flight conditions that would prove essential for mission success. There, Chen pointed toward a break in the forest canopy where twisted metal reflected dully through the swirling mist. Crash site, 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters. The civilian medical helicopter lay crumpled against a rocky outcropping, its fuselage twisted but not completely destroyed. Most critically, Denise could see movement near the wreckage. Survivors who had managed to exit the aircraft and were now exposed to rapidly worsening weather conditions. Phoenix Base. We have visual confirmation of the crash site with apparent survivors, beginning assessment for landing zone suitability. The terrain analysis required split-second decision-making as Denise evaluated wind patterns, landing surface conditions, and obstacle clearance requirements. The only viable landing zone was a narrow ridge, approximately 200 meters from the crash site, close enough for rescue operations but requiring precision flying that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Chen, I need you to coordinate with the medical team while I execute the approach. This landing zone is going to require maximum precision. What followed was a demonstration of flying skill that would be discussed in aviation circles for years to come. Denise guided the Apache through increasingly violent air currents, her control inputs precise and confident despite conditions that were testing the absolute limits of helicopter flight capabilities. The aircraft shuddered through wind gusts that exceeded 40 knots, but Denise's response was immediate and appropriate. She adjusted collective pitch to compensate for altitude fluctuations, managed cyclic control to maintain forward progress, and used anti-torque pedals to counter the violent yaw moments created by turbulent crosswinds. Incredible, Chen breathed as she watched Denise maintain perfect flight control through conditions that would have forced most pilots to abort the approach. How are you flying this smoothly in these wind conditions? 18 months of simulator practice with every possible weather scenario, Denise replied, her voice calm despite the intense concentration required for the approach. Plus detailed study of this aircraft's specific flight characteristics in turbulent conditions. The landing was executed with surgical precision despite the challenging terrain and weather conditions. Denise brought the Apache down onto the narrow ridge with minimal ground impact, positioning the aircraft perfectly for rapid deployment of the rescue team while maintaining engine power for immediate departure if conditions deteriorated further. Phoenix Base, Rescue 1 is on the ground, deploying medical team now. The rescue operation unfolded with clockwork efficiency as Denise maintained the Apache in ready condition while the medical team reached the crash site. Through her headset, she monitored their radio communications with growing concern. One of the survivors was a 7-year-old girl with critical injuries who needed immediate transport to advanced medical facilities. ECARS. Rescue 1, this is medical team leader. We have 4 survivors, including 1 critical pediatric patient. We need immediate evacuation with full medical support capabilities. This was the moment that justified all of Rodriguez's earlier software integration work. The medical evacuation systems that Denise had configured were now essential for keeping the injured child stable during the flight to Vanderbilt Medical Center. Medical team, be advised that full medical evacuation capabilities are operational. Bring the critical patient directly to the aircraft. The loading process required delicate coordination as the medical team transferred the injured child to the Apache's specialized medical evacuation systems. Denise monitored aircraft systems while maintaining communications with both the ground team and medical coordinators at Vanderbilt, who were preparing to receive the patient. Phoenix Base, we have all survivors aboard. Critical patient is stable on medical support systems, beginning immediate departure for Vanderbilt Medical Center. The return flight represented the ultimate test of every skill Denise had developed during her months of secret preparation. She needed to maintain smooth, stable flight to avoid aggravating the child's injuries while simultaneously navigating through weather conditions that continued to deteriorate with each passing minute. Her flight path took advantage of terrain features that provided some protection from the worst wind conditions, following routes she had studied extensively during her off-duty analysis of regional topography. Every course correction was calculated to minimize flight time while maintaining the stable flight conditions essential for medical transport. Vanderbilt Medical, this is Rescue 1. Critical pediatric patient en route, ETA 12 minutes. Medical status is stable but requires immediate surgical intervention upon arrival. The hospital's response confirmed that surgical teams were standing by and that helicopter landing facilities had been prepared for immediate patient transfer. As the Apache emerged from the mountain valleys into the clearer air surrounding Nashville, Denise felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal vindication and everything to do with mission success. The skills she had developed in secret had proven themselves when lives depended on excellence rather than politics. Vanderbilt Medical in sight, Chen announced as the hospital's helicopter pad came into view. Medical team is standing by for immediate patient transfer. Denise executed the final approach with the same precision that had characterized every aspect of the mission. The landing was smooth and confident, positioning the Apache perfectly for rapid patient transfer while maintaining all medical support systems in operational status. Phoenix Base Rescue 1 has successfully delivered critical patient to Vanderbilt Medical Center. All 4 survivors have been transferred to hospital care. Mission complete. The radio acknowledgement from Fort Campbell carried emotion that was immediately apparent despite the static-filled transmission. Outstanding work, Rescue 1. Return to base when weather conditions permit. As Denise shut down the Apache systems following the successful mission, Chen turned to her with an expression that mixed amazement with profound respect. "That was the most impressive flying I've ever witnessed," she said quietly. "You handled conditions that would have defeated pilots with decades of experience. How did you develop that level of skill?" Denise removed her helmet and considered the question that had defined her entire experience at Fort Campbell. 18 months of being told I wasn't ready gave me 18 months to become more ready than anyone expected. The flight back to Fort Campbell took place in improving weather conditions as the storm system moved eastward. But the real transformation had nothing to do with meteorology and everything to do with perception, recognition, and the power of preparation meeting opportunity. When Apache 040538-9 touched down at Fort Campbell, it carried a pilot whose reputation had been permanently transformed. Benchwarmer Betty no longer existed. In her place stood Denise Laurel, the pilot who had executed the most successful rescue mission in the base's recent history under conditions that had defeated conventional approaches. The hangar filled with personnel who had gathered to welcome back the rescue team. But the applause that greeted Denise as she emerged from the aircraft carried a different quality than the recognition she had received after her demonstration flight. This was acknowledgement of excellence proven under the ultimate test, real-world conditions where failure meant death and success required capabilities that transcended normal operational requirements. Colonel Hayes approached with the kind of expression reserved for moments when expectations are not just met but completely redefined. "Specialist Laurel," she said with formal authority that barely contained her pride, "that was exceptional flying under impossible conditions. You saved 4 lives today, including a child who would have died without your capabilities." The recognition was complete, but more importantly, it was earned through performance that spoke louder than any politics or prejudice that had defined her previous experience. Denise Laurel had proven that excellence, when properly prepared and given opportunity, could overcome any system designed to exclude it. 3 weeks after the rescue mission that saved 4 lives in the Tennessee mountains, Fort Campbell's morning briefing room buzzed with an energy that hadn't existed for years. The same conference table where Denise had once sat in the back row, dismissed and overlooked, now positioned her at the front as the newly appointed Chief Flight Instructor for Advanced Operations Training. Colonel Hayes stood before the assembled flight crews with an announcement that would fundamentally reshape the base's approach to pilot development and operational excellence. Effective immediately, all primary pilots will undergo recertification training using the modified procedures developed by Chief Warrant Officer Denise Laurel, Hayes announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose decisions had been vindicated by extraordinary results. The promotion from specialist to Chief Warrant Officer had been expedited through channels that typically required months of bureaucratic processing. But when the Pentagon's Aviation Safety Board reviewed the rescue mission footage and performance data, they determined that Denise's innovations represented advances in helicopter operations that warranted immediate recognition and implementation across military aviation. Morrison, Stevens, and Rodriguez sat in the front row with expressions that reflected their continuing struggle to process how completely their understanding of capability and expertise had been overturned. The pilot they had dismissed as Benchwarmer Betty now held authority over their professional development and career advancement. The training program will focus on 3 core areas, Denise announced as she took control of the briefing. Advanced startup procedures that reduce preparation time by 30%. Weather flying techniques that expand operational envelopes, and emergency response protocols that improve survival rates in critical situations. Her voice carried quiet confidence that came not from authority imposed by rank, but from expertise proven under conditions where failure meant death. Every person in the room understood that her knowledge had been tested in ways that transcended simulation or theory. Major Wells consulted her tablet before addressing the assembled pilots. Command has reviewed performance data from the rescue mission and determined that Chief Laurel's methods should be studied and implemented throughout military aviation. Her innovations represent the most significant advancement in helicopter operations in over a decade. The transformation extended beyond individual recognition to systematic change that would benefit countless future operations. The modified procedures that Denise had developed during 18 months of secret preparation were now being codified into official training manuals and operational protocols. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural rather than technical. "I want to address something that contributed to our previous operational limitations," Denise said, her gaze moving across the room to meet every pilot's eyes. "For too long, we've confused experience with expertise, seniority with capability, and conventional thinking with competence." The comment carried weight that resonated beyond immediate circumstances. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing not just individual vindication, but a fundamental challenge to assumptions about how excellence was recognized and developed within military aviation. True expertise comes from systematic preparation, continuous learning, and relentless pursuit of improvement. It doesn't care about politics, prejudice, or preconceived notions about who belongs in which role. Excellence demands recognition, regardless of who initially tried to suppress it. Staff Sergeant Thompson approached the front of the room with a maintenance logbook that documented the technical innovations Denise had implemented during her months of systematic aircraft analysis. "Ma'am," he said, addressing her with the respect reserved for recognized expertise, "the aircraft modification recommendations you developed have been reviewed by engineering teams at Fort Rucker. They want to implement your findings across the entire Apache fleet." The scope of recognition continued expanding as military aviation leadership absorbed the implications of what had been accomplished through individual determination and systematic preparation. Denise's innovations weren't just solving local problems. They were advancing the state-of-the-art for helicopter operations throughout the military. Chief Warrant Officer Foster entered the briefing room with documents that would provide the final confirmation of Denise's transformation from excluded outsider to essential expert. "Chief Laurel," Foster announced with obvious pride, "I've been authorized to inform you that the Army Aviation Center has requested your assignment as lead instructor for their new Advanced Helicopter Operations program. You'll be responsible for training the next generation of military aviators using the methods you developed." The assignment represented the pinnacle of recognition within military aviation education. The position would influence thousands of future pilots and establish Denise's innovations as the foundation for advanced helicopter operations throughout the armed forces. But as she absorbed the magnitude of professional advancement, Denise found herself thinking about the broader implications of her journey, from systematic exclusion to essential expertise. "This isn't just about one person overcoming obstacles," she told the assembled group. "It's about recognizing that potential exists everywhere, often in the most unexpected places. Excellence doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it speaks quietly through preparation, persistence, and unwavering commitment to improvement." Rodriguez stood slowly, his expression reflecting the personal transformation that had accompanied professional recognition of Denise's capabilities. "Chief Laurel," he said formally, "I owe you an apology that extends beyond personal disrespect. We created a system that nearly wasted exceptional talent because of assumptions that had nothing to do with actual capability. Your success makes all of us better, and I'm grateful for the lesson in humility." The acknowledgement represented more than individual contrition. It reflected institutional recognition that excellence could emerge from anywhere, and that systematic exclusion represented not just personal injustice, but operational inefficiency that could prove costly when capabilities mattered most. Stevens added his own recognition. the modified procedures you developed didn't just save lives during the rescue mission. They've made all of us better pilots by challenging us to think beyond conventional limitations and pursue continuous improvement. As the briefing concluded and personnel began departing for their new training assignments, Denise remained in the conference room that had once symbolized her exclusion from meaningful participation in unit operations. Sarah Chen approached with the kind of expression that reflected genuine admiration, mixed with understanding of what the transformation had required. "How does it feel," Chen asked quietly, "to go from Benchwarmer Betty to the most respected aviator on the base?" Denise considered the question while looking around the room where her journey had begun with systematic dismissal and now culminated in recognition that exceeded her original aspirations. "It feels like validation of something I've always believed," she replied thoughtfully. "That preparation eventually meets opportunity, that competence ultimately demands recognition, and that excellence will always find a way to prove itself regardless of initial obstacles." The afternoon brought a final symbolic moment when Denise walked through the hangar where she had spent 18 months relegated to backup duties and excluded from meaningful flight operations. Apache 04-05389 sat in its familiar position, but now it represented not limitation but liberation, the aircraft that had carried her from obscurity to recognition through demonstrated excellence under ultimate pressure. Sergeant Thompson approached with a maintenance logbook that documented every technical innovation, every efficiency improvement, and every systematic advance that had emerged from months of patient preparation. "Chief," he said with quiet satisfaction, "that bird's been redesignated as the primary training aircraft for advanced procedures. Every pilot who learns your methods will start their education in the same Apache that carried you to recognition." The symbolism was perfect. The aircraft that had once represented exclusion would now serve as the foundation for training that advanced the entire profession. As evening settled over Fort Campbell, Denise stood in the hangar surrounded by Apache helicopters that no longer represented barriers to advancement but tools for excellence available to anyone with the determination to master them. Her journey from Benchwarmer Betty to Chief Warrant Officer had proven that potential exists everywhere, waiting for the right combination of preparation and opportunity. Sometimes the most powerful victories come not from confronting prejudice directly, but from becoming so undeniably excellent that recognition becomes inevitable. Sometimes the best answer to exclusion is preparation so thorough that when opportunity arrives, performance speaks louder than any politics designed to silence it. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks turns out to be exactly the person everyone needs. Denise Laurel had been ready when her moment came. Now she would help others develop the same readiness, the same quiet confidence, and the same unshakable belief that excellence demands recognition, regardless of who initially tried to deny it. The transformation was complete, but the impact would extend far beyond one person's journey from exclusion to recognition. It would influence how potential was identified, how capability was developed, and how excellence was recognized throughout military aviation. Sometimes the most important victories are won not through confrontation, but through patient preparation and unwavering commitment to becoming undeniably, unmistakably excellent when it matters most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.